You're in your 40s now, maybe your 50s, and there's something you do that people notice. When everything falls apart, when the crisis hits, when everyone else is spiraling, you get very calm, almost eerily calm. Someone once asked you where that came from. You didn't have an answer, but you're about to get one. Because that calm wasn't something you learned. It was something that was installed in you, sentence by sentence, experience by experience, starting around age 6. And the people who installed it, they'd be investigated by child services today, and those sentences weren't gentle, they weren't therapeutic, they didn't validate your feelings or acknowledge your pain, but they did something else. Something that modern psychology is only now beginning to understand. Those 6 brutal words built a psychological architecture that no parenting book could replicate. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what those words created inside you, and you're going to see your entire childhood differently. And it started earlier than you think. You're 7 years old. It's a Saturday afternoon in July. The pavement is hot enough to burn through your sneakers. You've been riding your bike for hours, jumping curbs, racing down hills with your feet off the pedals, feeling like you could fly. And then the front wheel catches a crack in the sidewalk. You don't even have time to think. You're airborne. You hit the concrete hard, hands first, then knees, then face. The impact knocks the wind out of you. You lie there for a second, trying to breathe. Your palms are shredded, little pieces of gravel embedded in the skin. Your knees are bleeding through your jeans. Your chin is scraped raw, and you start to cry. Not because of the pain exactly, because of the shock, because you thought you had it under control and you didn't. You stand up, wobbly, and walk your bike home. Every step hurts. You can taste blood in your mouth. You walk through the front door expecting comfort, expecting someone to rush over, expecting Band-Aids and ice packs and concern. Your father looks up from the newspaper. He assesses the damage in about half a second. Blood on your knees, torn jeans, gravel in your hands, tears streaming down your face. And he says 6 words, "You're fine, get back on." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Let me help you." Not, "Maybe we should take a break." "You're fine, get back on." And something in his voice tells you this isn't a suggestion. This is an observation of reality. You are, in fact, fine. The evidence of your survival is that you're standing here. And the next move is to get back on the bike. So you do. You wipe your face with the back of your hand. You walk back outside, you get on the bike, and you ride. And here's what nobody told you at the time. That moment just rewired your brain. You didn't know it. Your father didn't know it. But psychologists now have a name for what just happened. It's called stress inoculation. And it works the same way a vaccine works. A small dose of manageable adversity trains your system to handle larger doses later. You fell, you bled, you cried, and then you got back on. Your brain recorded that sequence. Pain does not equal catastrophe. Failure does not require rescue. You can survive discomfort and continue. That's not a lesson you could learn from a book. You had to feel it. And you had to feel it without someone stepping in to fix it for you. But that wasn't the only sentence. There were others, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, each one carrying the same underlying message. "I believe you can handle this. Walk it off. Rub some dirt on it. If you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about." Through a modern lens, these sound almost abusive, cold, dismissive. But the children who heard them didn't interpret them that way, because underneath the words was a transmission of confidence. Your pain is real, but you are stronger than this moment. Every single time you heard one of those phrases, you internalized something. Not that your pain didn't matter, but that pain was temporary, that your body could heal itself. That discomfort was survivable, that you possessed, within yourself, the resources to recover. This is the opposite of what modern parenting teaches. Today, when a child falls, adults rush in. They assess every scrape. They validate every emotion. They ask detailed questions about pain levels. They treat every setback as potentially traumatic. Both approaches come from love, but they wire the brain completely differently. The modern child learns when something goes wrong, an adult will fix it. Help comes from outside. I should wait for rescue. The 1970s child learns something else. When something goes wrong, I fix it. Help comes from inside. I am the rescue. And that difference in wiring shows up 40 years later when the crisis hits. Walk it off. You heard that one a lot too. You twisted your ankle playing kickball. You jammed your finger catching a baseball. You took an elbow to the ribs during a game of street hockey. And the response was always the same. Walk it off. Keep moving. Motion is the cure. And here's the thing, it worked. Not because the pain went away, but because you learned that you could function through pain. That discomfort didn't have to stop you. There's a concept in psychology called frustration tolerance. It's the ability to experience setbacks without falling apart. And it's one of the strongest predictors of long-term success in life. Stronger than intelligence, stronger than talent. Because frustration is guaranteed, failure is guaranteed. The only variable is whether you collapse when it happens or whether you keep moving. And you built your frustration tolerance one twisted ankle at a time. Rub some dirt on it. That was the field medicine of your childhood. Scraped knee? Dirt. Bleeding elbow? Dirt. Cut on your hand? Dirt. It sounds insane now, like a parody of outdated masculinity, but there was wisdom in it. Not medical wisdom, obviously. Psychological wisdom. The message wasn't that dirt has healing properties. The message was, this injury is so minor it doesn't even require real treatment. You're catastrophizing. Recalibrate. And you did recalibrate. You learned to assess your own injuries, to differentiate between actual damage and temporary pain. You developed what psychologists call accurate threat assessment. Most things that feel urgent aren't actually dangerous. Most pain that feels unbearable is actually manageable. And the way you learned that wasn't through explanation, it was through experience. You rubbed dirt on it, you kept playing, and you survived. But the most psychologically complex phrase was the last one. If you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. That one sounds truly harsh to modern ears, almost cruel. But the children who heard it understood something that the words alone don't convey. It was a reset button. You were spiraling, locked in an emotional loop, and that phrase snapped you out of it. It forced you to perform a mental calculation. Is this situation actually worth crying about, or am I crying out of habit? Usually, you stopped crying, not because you were afraid, but because the question made you think, and thinking interrupted the emotional spiral. You learned emotional regulation through external pressure first, and then, gradually, you internalized it. You started asking yourself that question before anyone else could ask it. Is this actually worth the reaction I'm having? And that internal voice, that capacity for self-interruption, became one of your most valuable psychological tools. This created something researchers are only now beginning to understand, an internal locus of control. That's the psychological term for believing that your actions determine your outcomes. It's the opposite of an external locus of control, where you believe that outside forces determine what happens to you. And study after study shows the same thing. People with an internal locus of control are happier, more successful, more resilient, and less likely to suffer from anxiety and depression. You weren't taught this in a classroom. You absorbed it through your skin. Every time you fell and got back on, you reinforced it. Every time you walked it off, you strengthened it. Every time you rubbed dirt on it and kept playing, you built it. You are the author of your own experience. You are not a victim of circumstances. You are an agent who acts on the world. And that belief, installed at age 7, is still running your psychology today. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The generation being raised today is growing up with the opposite message. Participation trophies, grade inflation, trigger warnings, safe spaces. Every institution designed to protect children from the experience of failure. And the data is starting to come in. Anxiety rates among young people have tripled. Depression rates have doubled. Suicide rates are climbing. And psychologists are asking, what changed? One thing that changed is this. Children are no longer inoculated against failure. They're protected from it. And protection feels like love. But inoculation is love too. A different kind. The kind that prepares you for a world that doesn't care about your feelings. The kind that builds the internal strength to handle rejection, disappointment, and pain. The kind that says, you're fine, get back on. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset shows that children praised for effort outperformed children praised for ability. But you got something even more powerful than praise for effort. You often got no praise at all. You had to generate your own sense of accomplishment. Internally, you jumped the curb, you landed the trick, you won the game, and nobody threw you a parade. So you learned to feel proud without external validation. You learned that the satisfaction comes from the doing, not from the applause. This is why you don't spiral after professional rejection. This is why you don't catastrophize relationship conflicts. This is why you can sit in uncertainty without falling apart. You've been here before. You've survived worse. And every time you survived, you got a little bit stronger. Not because someone told you that you were strong, but because you proved it to yourself. The parents who said these things weren't perfect. They weren't trained in childhood psychology. They didn't read parenting books. They were repeating what they heard from their own parents, passing down a folk wisdom that had survived for generations. And that wisdom worked because it was aligned with how human resilience actually develops, through exposure, through experience, through surviving small doses of manageable adversity. Now imagine trying to explain this to someone raised in the 2000s. Imagine telling them that the best thing your parents ever did for you was tell you to stop crying and get back on the bike. They'd think you were describing abuse. They'd ask if you've considered therapy. They'd suggest that maybe you're just rationalizing neglect. Because the entire cultural script has flipped. We now believe that children are fragile, that they need constant protection, that every negative emotion must be validated and processed and talked through. But you know something they don't. You know what you're carrying. You've watched people half your age fall apart over things that wouldn't have registered as problems in your childhood. A critical email, a social media argument, someone not texting back. And you're not judging them, you're just noticing the difference. You can handle things they can't, not because you're better, but because you were trained differently. And the training wasn't gentle, it was rough, it was often painful, but it was effective. You learned that failure isn't fatal, that pain is temporary, that you possess within yourself the capacity to recover. And those lessons are worth more than any trophy. Everything you've heard so far was the foundation, the daily training, the small moments that built your psychological immune system. But there's one experience you haven't thought about in years, and it's the one that explains the most about who you are right now. The moment that took everything you'd learned and tested it at a level you weren't ready for. It's a Tuesday afternoon, you're 12 years old, maybe 13. You're trying out for the baseball team. You've been practicing for weeks. You know the drills. You can hit. You can field. You've run these scenarios in your head 100 times. You show up. You give it everything you have. You execute. And when the list goes up on the gymnasium wall 2 days later, your name isn't on it. Nobody pulls you aside to explain. Nobody offers feedback. Nobody tells you what you did wrong or how you could improve. The list is the message. You didn't make it. You walk home alone. You don't cry because you learned a long time ago that crying doesn't help, but something in your chest feels hollow. Like a piece of you has been scooped out. You walk through the front door. Your father is in the kitchen. He looks at your face. He knows. And he says, "So what are you going to do now?" Not "I'm sorry," not "you'll get them next time," not "it's okay to be disappointed." What are you going to do now? And that question, in that moment, changed everything, because it forced you to make a choice. You could collapse. You could quit. You could decide that this failure meant something about your worth as a person, or you could answer the question. And answering the question meant moving forward. So you did. You joined a different team. You practiced harder. You found another path. And what you learned in that moment was the most important lesson of your childhood. Failure is feedback, not identity. You didn't make the team. That was a fact. But it wasn't a verdict on who you were. It was information about what happened. And information can be used. The statistician Nassim Taleb has a term for this. He calls it anti-fragility. It's different from resilience. Resilience means you can withstand stress and return to your original state. Anti-fragility means you get stronger from stress. You don't just survive adversity, you improve because of it. And that's what those 6 words created. A generation of anti-fragile people. People who don't just bounce back. People who use the bounce to go higher. You're watching a cop show recently. An 8-year-old kid is playing in the street unsupervised. A neighbor calls the police. The mother is investigated for child neglect. And you think, my parents would have been arrested every single day of my childhood. Because you were playing in the street at 8. You were riding your bike across town at 9. You were taking the bus alone at 10. And nobody thought twice about it. But here's what nobody understood at the time. That freedom was the final piece of the training. The bike crash taught you that pain was survivable. The rejection taught you that failure was recoverable. But the freedom taught you something else. That you were capable. That you could navigate the world. That you didn't need constant supervision because you had something better, judgment. You learned to assess risk yourself, to read situations, to trust your instincts. And that capacity, that bone-deep confidence in your ability to handle whatever comes, is something that can't be taught in a seminar. It can't be downloaded from an app. You had to earn it. One unsupervised afternoon at a time. So now you have the full picture. The bike crashes weren't just bike crashes. The walk-it-off moments weren't just dismissed injuries. The failures weren't just disappointments. Every single one of those experiences was building the same psychological architecture, a framework of internal strength that's held you up for decades. And here's what you carry into every room now, whether you realize it or not: the quiet knowledge that you can handle it. Whatever it is. The crisis at work, the conflict at home, the unexpected disaster. You've been here before. Maybe not in this exact situation, but in the emotional territory. You felt the ground drop out. You've tasted failure. You've survived pain. And every single time, you got back on. That calm that people notice? That's not a personality trait you were born with. It's scar tissue. It's the residue of 1,000 small moments where you learned that panic doesn't help, where you discovered that the way through difficulty is to keep moving, where you proved to yourself that you're stronger than the moment. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't abuse. It was a different kind of love, the kind that prepares instead of protects, the kind that believes in your capacity instead of shielding you from challenge, the kind that says, the cruelest thing I can do is make you fragile, and the kindest thing I can do is make you strong. And you've been carrying it your whole life. That internal voice that sounds suspiciously like your father, the one that shows up when everything falls apart, the one that assesses the damage and says, with absolute certainty, you're fine, get back on. Someone you know is carrying the same thing. They're in their 40s or 50s now. They get quiet during crises. They don't panic. They don't spiral. And they've probably never heard anyone explain exactly why they're wired this way. They just know they're different. They just know they can handle things that break other people. This is the gift you were given, not wrapped in soft words or gentle validation, but delivered raw, 6 words at a time. And it's a gift worth sharing, because the world needs to understand that strength doesn't come from protection. It comes from exposure, from falling down, from getting back on, from learning in your bones that you're fine.